She walked through the polished doors of the grand restaurant every evening, her uniform neat but plain, blending in with the hustle of other staff members. The chandeliers glistened overhead, and the soft hum of conversation filled the air. This place was a world apart from the small, cramped apartment she called home, a world she felt both drawn to and separate from. The tables were lined with fine china, glasses that caught the light, and silverware that gleamed under the warm lights. Patrons talked in soft voices, a careful performance of elegance, and she moved among them silently, taking orders, delivering plates, and making sure everything appeared perfect every night. She passed the old piano in the corner. It was ancient, with a few chipped keys and a surface that had dulled over time, but it had character. Most people ignored it, perhaps thinking it was just decoration or that it had long stopped working. She remembered hearing it play once as a child, in a music hall her mother used to take her to. The sound had been magical, filling the room and her heart with something she could not yet name. She had dreamed of playing on something like it, imagining herself sitting there, letting her fingers dance over the keys, letting the music flow. But dreams had a way of being pushed aside, overtaken by responsibilities, bills, and work. Her days were long and tiring. She woke before the sun to prepare for another shift, making sure she had something to eat and that her small apartment was ready for another day. Work was not easy. The restaurant demanded perfection, and the patrons could be unforgiving. Some smiled politely, some were impatient, and some were downright rude. She had learned to move through the waves of human moods, carrying trays and refilling glasses without letting their impatience touch her spirit. Yet, the piano always called to her quietly, a soft whisper that made her pause for just a moment as she carried her tray past it. She often imagined what it would be like if she could sit there and play. The idea was almost like a secret she held for herself, tucked away beneath her apron and her careful smile. At home, she would sometimes hum melodies she remembered, simple tunes that would grow more complicated in her mind, until she felt she was playing in the grand hall of her imagination. Her fingers itched to reach out and touch keys that no one cared about anymore, and she felt an ache, a longing that was more than just for music. It was for a moment where she could be herself, beyond the uniform, beyond the expectations, beyond the invisible line that separated her world from the world of those who sat at the tables. One evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. The chatter was louder, the clinking of glasses sharper, the waitstaff moving like a well-rehearsed machine. She carried a tray filled with drinks, weaving through legs and chairs, balancing the glasses with careful precision. Her heart raced not from the pace, but from the anticipation of the moment when she would have a chance to breathe. She set the tray down at a table, offered a polite smile, and moved on. Her eyes flicked to the piano as she passed it, and for a second, she let herself imagine what it would feel like to lift the lid and press down a key. There was a man sitting at one of the tables, older, dressed in a tailored suit that looked expensive. He noticed her glance at the piano and smirked, leaning over to his companion. His words were soft, but she heard them clearly, meant for her, a laugh, a sneer, a quiet judgment. She stiffened, keeping her expression calm, though a flush rose in her cheeks. People often underestimated her. They judged her by her clothes, by her position, by the life she lived that seemed smaller and less impressive than theirs. It had become something she was used to. Though it still stung. She continued with her work, moving from table to table, her mind flickering back to the piano. She wondered if anyone else in the restaurant had noticed it, if anyone remembered the music it once produced. Most were too caught up in their meals, their conversations, their own lives. She thought of the hours she had spent practicing in secret, the melodies she had learned from old books, from recordings, from memory. Music had always been a part of her, even when the rest of her world demanded she push it aside. As the evening wore on, the crowd began to thin. The sharp edges of the day softened. Plates were cleared, glasses polished, and the staff exchanged tired but satisfied glances. She took a moment to breathe, leaning against a pillar near the piano. Her fingers itched. The room was quieter now, the noise fading into a distant hum. No one was watching closely. No one would care if she reached out just for a moment. She walked slowly to the piano, each step deliberate, feeling the worn carpet under her shoes. The man in the suit glanced up, saw her approach, and his smile twisted into something sharper. He thought he knew what she was about to do, and he thought it would be laughable. But she did not falter. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the cool, smooth surface under her fingertips. It was alive, more alive than she had remembered. Her breath caught as she pressed a single key, hearing a sound that was pure and honest. It was a small note, but it carried weight. The sound seemed to linger, filling the space between tables, cutting through the remnants of conversation and laughter. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her fingers find the keys that felt right, guided not by memory alone, but by something deeper, something that had been with her all her life. The first melody was soft, hesitant, a quiet introduction. She could feel the room's attention shift almost imperceptibly, the air becoming more still. Patrons who had not noticed her before now turned their heads slightly, curious despite themselves. Her music grew steadily, each note flowing into the next. The hesitancy faded, replaced by confidence. She remembered the lessons she had never taken formally, the hours she had spent on worn sheets of music, the songs she had taught herself by ear. She let her fingers move freely, allowing her emotions to guide the rhythm. Every mistake she had ever been criticized for in school, every time someone had said she was not talented enough, every whispered doubt from her past faded away with the music. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a musician, a storyteller, a soul speaking through the piano. Some patrons began to whisper among themselves, their skepticism fading as the melody took hold. The man in the suit, the one who had laughed earlier, straightened in his chair. He could not hide his surprise, nor could he contain the subtle awe in his eyes. The sound was beautiful, unpolished yet perfect in its honesty. He leaned back, momentarily silent, as though the music had drawn a line between the world he thought he knew and the one unfolding before him. She did not rush. The notes came naturally, effortlessly, as if they had been waiting for this moment to be heard. Each chord seemed to tell a story of struggle, of quiet resilience, of dreams carried in the shadows. She could feel the room responding, a shift in energy that was invisible but undeniable. Waiters paused in their work, guests set down glasses, and the entire space seemed to hold its breath, waiting, listening, being transformed by the sound that had emerged from an old, forgotten piano. Time seemed to stretch. She played for herself, for the little girl who had once dreamed in the music halls of her youth, for the young woman who had survived hardship and continued to carry her talent quietly. Her hands moved with memory and instinct, dancing over the keys in a way that no one expected. The melody swelled, rose, and fell, capturing attention not by force, but by grace. There was no showiness, no desire to impress, only the purity of expression that came from a lifetime of hidden practice and deep passion. When she finally stopped, the room remained silent for a heartbeat longer than expected. The spell had been cast, the ordinary space transformed into something almost sacred. The first person to break the silence was a young child sitting at a nearby table, clapping hesitantly. Then another guest joined in, and soon, a round of applause spread through the restaurant. The same people who had ignored her, who had judged her by her uniform and her station, were now looking at her with new eyes. Their expressions were a mixture of astonishment and respect, the laughter and ridicule forgotten. She stood quietly, hands resting lightly on the piano, feeling a mixture of relief and exhilaration. No words were needed. The music had spoken for her. She had reclaimed something that had been hers all along, not for recognition, but for the simple truth of expression. The old piano, once ignored and underestimated, had been the instrument of a revelation, not just of talent, but of dignity and spirit. Her heart swelled, not with pride in the way the world might measure it, but with the quiet joy of knowing she had touched something real. The elite guests, the polished restaurant, the lights and fine china, all of it had faded to the background. For a moment, there was only the music, and the woman who had finally let it speak. After that evening at the piano, the restaurant felt different to her. She walked through the doors the next day with the same uniform, the same apron, but the world around her seemed slightly altered. Staff members who had always treated her with polite indifference now glanced at her with a quiet curiosity. The memory of the applause, the sudden shift in the room, lingered in her mind like a light that refused to fade. She had thought it was only a fleeting moment, something that would vanish as quickly as it had come. But there was a subtle sense that something had changed. The old piano still stood in the corner, waiting, almost expectant, as if it remembered the touch of her fingers. She often found herself near it during breaks, fingers hovering over the keys but not yet pressing them. It was a strange feeling, wanting to play and fearing attention at the same time. She was no stranger to judgment. She had lived under its shadow for much of her life. Yet now, there was also the awareness that she had surprised people, even those who had been quick to mock. That knowledge, while quietly thrilling, was paired with a hesitation she could not easily shake. The patrons that evening were different from the usual crowd. They were a mix of business people, socialites, and families. Some who had heard whispers about the woman who played the piano the night before. Some came in curious, some skeptical, and some perhaps hoping to witness the story for themselves. She moved among the tables, carrying trays, taking orders, offering smiles that were careful and polite. Her mind wandered to the piano again, imagining the sound of music spilling softly into the room, catching attention, and holding it. A small group of well-dressed women lingered near the entrance, speaking in hushed voices, glances frequently flicking toward her. She caught snippets of their conversation as she passed, words like waitress, piano, talent, and surprising floating in the air. It was strange to hear herself described in such terms, both exhilarating and unnerving. She had always lived in the quiet, practiced humility, and yet here she was, a topic of interest, a story that seemed too good to be true. The day passed in a blur of activity. Plates clinked, glasses rattled, and the air was thick with the aroma of roasted meats, fresh bread, and delicate pastries. She moved with practiced ease, balancing trays, refilling drinks, and ensuring that each table received the attention it deserved. And yet, every time she passed the piano, her fingers itched to press the keys. The room seemed to hum softly with anticipation, though no one else could hear it. She could feel it in her bones, a vibration of possibility and daring, the reminder that her talent was real and alive. Toward the end of her shift, as the restaurant began to quiet down, she found herself standing near the piano once more. A few guests lingered, sipping wine, engaged in quiet conversation. But there was an almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere. The man from the previous night, the one who had laughed, was seated at a table across the room. He had a notebook in front of him and a thoughtful look on his face. His eyes occasionally flicked toward her, watching, as if measuring something he could not yet understand. Her fingers brushed against the keys, feeling the familiar smoothness beneath her touch. She pressed a single note, low and deliberate, and let it resonate through the quiet room. The sound was a gentle challenge, a soft call that drew attention without demanding it. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with a thrill of possibility. She began to play, letting the melody flow, simple at first, almost conversational, a story told in sound rather than words. Each note carried emotion, a mixture of longing, hope, and quiet defiance. The patrons gradually noticed. Heads turned, conversations paused, and forks hovered midair as the music filled the space. There was something intimate about the way she played, a sense that the piano and she were speaking together in a language no one else could fully understand. The man with the notebook scribbled furiously, his earlier skepticism replaced by fascination. Others whispered, exchanged glances, and leaned closer. Drawn in by the honesty of the sound, she played with a freedom she had rarely allowed herself, each note a small rebellion against the expectations that had confined her. Memories of childhood lessons, of music abandoned due to necessity, of dreams deferred and dismissed, flowed into her playing. She felt the piano respond beneath her fingers, the keys telling her when to linger, when to rise, when to let the melody breathe. It was not just a performance. It was a dialogue, an expression of a lifetime of hidden talent and quiet determination. Minutes passed without her realizing it. The room was fully engaged, yet no one interrupted, no one demanded attention. It was as if the music had created a space of its own, separate from the hierarchy of the restaurant, separate from the world outside. Patrons who had been judgmental moments before were now captivated. Their expressions softened, their movements slowed, caught in the spell she had woven. Even the staff paused in their tasks, watching with awe, feeling the weight and beauty of what was unfolding. She did not seek applause. She played because it was necessary, because it was the one place where she could truly be herself. The music carried her through emotions she could not name, through memories both sweet and painful, and through a future she had only dared to imagine in fragments. The piano was not just an instrument. It was a vessel for everything she had kept hidden, everything she had longed to express. The notes were her voice, clear and undeniable. As the final chords lingered in the quiet air, the first sound to break the spell was a soft exhale from one of the guests. Then another clapped, and slowly, a ripple of applause spread through the room. It was tentative at first, then stronger, louder, a recognition of something rare and extraordinary. She rose from the piano, hands resting lightly on the edge, feeling the energy of the room, the shift in perception that her music had created. The man with the notebook closed it slowly, nodding, a look of respect and something deeper in his eyes. The staff exchanged glances, the younger one staring with wonder, the older one smiling quietly, having witnessed a transformation in the ordinary. Patrons who had been skeptical or dismissive now saw her in a new light, realizing that their assumptions had been shallow, their judgments hasty. She had reminded them, in a gentle but powerful way, that talent and depth often reside where least expected, that the surface rarely tells the full story. She stepped back, heart still racing, and returned to her work, the sense of fulfillment mingling with fatigue. Orders were taken, plates delivered, glasses refilled, yet the undercurrent of the evening was different. The restaurant seemed to breathe differently, more aware of human possibility, more attentive to the quiet marvels that often go unnoticed. She moved through her tasks with a new ease, carrying a secret joy that was hers alone, yet shared with everyone who had heard her music later. As she prepared to leave for the night, she lingered near the piano one last time. Her fingers brushed the keys lightly, a silent promise to herself. She had touched something profound, and though she did not know what the future held, she knew this: the piano, the music, the moment of courage had changed her, and perhaps it had changed others too. The old piano had not just been played, it had been heard, understood, and respected, and she had reclaimed a part of herself that would never be forgotten again. The days after the first evening of music felt surreal. She continued her work at the restaurant, moving through the polished floors and crystal chandeliers, serving guests who had started whispering about her talent. Yet she tried to maintain the quiet routine she had always known. Her steps were measured, her smile gentle, but inside, a storm of emotion and excitement swirled. Every glance at the piano reminded her of the moment when the keys had spoken, and it had felt as though the world had paused to listen. She longed to return to that feeling, yet she hesitated, unsure of whether the magic would appear again if she reached out too soon. The staff, though kind, watched her differently now. Some approached with small questions, subtle hints about her music, and gentle encouragements. Others remained distant, unsure of how to react to the change in the air around her. She sensed admiration mingled with curiosity and even envy. She did not let it disturb her. The piano had given her something that no attention could match, a sense of belonging and purpose, even if only fleeting. One quiet afternoon, a small group of guests lingered near the entrance. They were different from the usual crowd, more refined, speaking in low tones about matters that seemed important in their world. She served them their drinks and meals with her usual poise, but she felt the subtle scrutiny, the way their eyes followed her, their expressions betraying a desire to understand the woman behind the uniform. She knew what they had heard about her, and though she felt the weight of their expectations, she also felt a thrill of anticipation. Perhaps this was a chance to show that the music was not a one-time occurrence, that it was part of her. Always, she approached the piano slowly, feeling the familiar chill of the keys under her fingers. The first note she pressed resonated in the room like a gentle call, drawing attention from those around her. The music began quietly, a soft introduction that allowed listeners to ease into its world. She let her mind drift, recalling melodies from her past, fragments of compositions she had heard, and tunes she had imagined during long nights when sleep had eluded her. Her fingers moved with a fluidity born of years of private practice. Though few had known of the discipline she had kept in secret, the guests were captivated. Conversations dwindled into silence as each note spoke more eloquently than words ever could. Some leaned forward, their elbows resting lightly on the table, while others closed their eyes, letting the music fill their senses. She did not rush, letting each chord breathe, each melody unfold naturally. It was not a performance designed to impress. It was an expression, raw and genuine, of her connection to the piano and to the world she often felt distant from. She noticed the man who had been skeptical the first night, now seated quietly with a notebook. He jotted down observations, occasionally pausing to absorb a particularly moving sequence of notes. There was a deep respect in his eyes, mixed with fascination and curiosity. She played on, feeling the subtle shift in the room's energy, sensing that the music was transforming perceptions and creating a space where social divisions, judgments, and preconceptions were temporarily irrelevant. The piano became a bridge, connecting her to the patrons in a way that her uniform and duties never could. Hours seemed to pass in moments. The melodies wove a tapestry of emotions, stories without words that spoke of hope, struggle, and triumph. Her hands glided across the keys, each motion deliberate yet natural, as if her body remembered the music before her mind did. Memories of lessons taken long ago, of songs learned by ear and repeated until perfect, surfaced effortlessly. The piano did not just respond, It conversed with her, its ancient strings resonating with understanding, with acknowledgement of the dedication and passion she had poured into every private practice session. A young girl at a nearby table clutched her mother's hand, eyes wide with awe. The mother, a stern woman who usually remained composed in all social settings, was quietly moved, tears glistening in her eyes. The music reached beyond superficial judgment, touching hearts in a way few expected from a waitress in a modest uniform. She glanced briefly at the child and mother, offering a soft smile before returning to her melody, aware that the piano had the power to connect people, regardless of age, status, or expectation. As the evening progressed, a subtle tension grew among some patrons. They had come expecting a quiet, ordinary dinner, and instead, they found themselves drawn into an experience they could not fully control or predict. The music was unyielding in its sincerity, demanding attention without force. Even those initially skeptical could not deny the skill, the depth, and the emotion pouring from her hands. It was a reminder that talent often hides in places society overlooks, and brilliance does not announce itself with pomp or ceremony. It emerges quietly, sometimes from the most unexpected sources. She felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration as the final chords approached. The room was silent, the kind of silence that carries weight, anticipation, and respect. She allowed the last notes to linger, a soft echo that seemed to suspend time. Then, slowly, the spell was broken by applause. It started quietly, almost tentatively, and then grew, spreading like a wave through the room. Patrons who had been skeptical now clapped with genuine admiration. Staff members who had been unsure how to react now joined in, smiling with pride and amazement. The applause was not just for the music, but for the courage it represented, the revelation of hidden depth, and the quiet triumph of a human spirit. The man with the notebook closed it gently, nodding toward her with a smile that spoke of understanding and respect. Others approached her cautiously, offering compliments, acknowledging their surprise, and expressing gratitude for the beauty she had shared. She accepted their words with humility, aware that the music itself was the true message, and that recognition, while pleasant, was secondary to the act of playing later. As she returned to her routine, delivering plates and refilling glasses, she noticed subtle changes in the restaurant. Conversations were tinged with curiosity, glances were warmer, and there was a sense of shared awareness that something remarkable had occurred. Patrons lingered longer, staff moved with a quiet confidence, and even the air seemed charged with possibility. She moved through it all with a sense of calm joy, carrying the memory of her music and the knowledge that she had touched lives in a way words alone could not achieve. When the night finally ended, she lingered once more by the piano. Her fingers brushed the keys lightly, a soft reminder that the music was always there, waiting for her, a faithful companion that required nothing but honesty and presence. She closed the piano gently and stepped back, taking a deep breath. The restaurant, the patrons, the lights, the polished floors all had been part of the experience. But the true change was within her. She felt stronger, more certain, and more connected to a part of herself that had been dormant but never lost. As she walked toward the exit, she felt a quiet anticipation for what the future might hold. The piano had revealed something profound, not only to the world around her but to herself. She had been reminded of the value of patience, practice, and quiet courage, of the importance of listening to one's inner voice, and of the ability of art to transcend social barriers and touch hearts unexpectedly. Each step toward the door felt lighter, buoyed by the knowledge that her talent was real, that her music mattered, and that the piano would always be there, waiting for the next time she was ready to share it with the world. Days turned into weeks, and her life continued much the same outwardly, yet everything felt subtly different. She moved through her shifts with the same careful attention to detail, serving patrons with politeness and patience. Yet now there was a quiet confidence underlying her every movement. The piano remained in the corner, a constant presence, an unspoken invitation. Each time she passed it, she felt the pull to sit, to let the music flow again. But the thought was tempered by a lingering uncertainty. She had tasted the reaction of the guests before, and while it had been affirming, she could not help but wonder if the moment had been a fluke, a brief alignment of circumstance and luck. The restaurant itself seemed to have noticed her change. Staff members approached her with a mixture of respect and curiosity, their expressions shifting from polite acknowledgement to quiet admiration. Even the manager, a stern figure who rarely smiled, offered a nod of recognition as she completed her rounds. There was an unspoken acknowledgement that something rare had been witnessed, and though words were scarce, The atmosphere carried a sense of shared understanding. It was as if the restaurant had become a small ecosystem, subtly altered by the presence of her music and the revelation of her hidden talent. One evening, the restaurant was unusually busy. A large group had gathered to celebrate a corporate event, their laughter echoing through the polished hall, their chatter interwoven with the clatter of cutlery. She moved gracefully among the tables, balancing trays and refilling glasses, aware of every glance that lingered on her, every whisper that floated past. There was an expectant energy in the room, a quiet curiosity, as if some guests had heard of the woman who played the piano, and now anticipated a glimpse of the unexpected. She tried to focus on her work, yet the piano called to her persistently, each note in her mind begging for release. At a quiet moment, when the dining room had a lull, she allowed herself to approach the piano. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, familiar with the texture, the resistance, the subtle life of the instrument beneath her fingers. She pressed a key, and the sound echoed softly, capturing attention immediately. Patrons paused in their conversations, the staff turned with quiet smiles, and the room held its breath, waiting. She began to play, slowly at first, letting the melody rise and fall like a gentle wave. Each note carried meaning, a story without words, speaking directly to the hearts of those who listened. The music grew in complexity, not through showiness but through emotion and intent. She played pieces that reflected her life, the struggles, the quiet moments of hope, the dreams that had seemed too far away. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, guided by a deep understanding that came not from formal instruction alone, but from a life lived in reflection and practice. The patrons who had laughed at her before now leaned forward, their skepticism dissolved by the sincerity and depth of the performance. There was a hush in the room, an acknowledgement that something extraordinary was unfolding. She noticed a familiar figure in the crowd, the man with the notebook who had observed her previous performances. He watched with intense focus, occasionally jotting down notes, his expression a mixture of respect and curiosity. There was no judgment, only observation and appreciation. She played on, each chord a thread weaving the room together, connecting people who might never have found a shared moment otherwise. The music became a silent dialogue, bridging the gaps of social expectation, status, and personal history. The melody shifted, growing softer, more introspective. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the music guide her, allowing herself to feel each emotion fully. Memories of her childhood, the quiet lessons learned in secret, the long hours of practice alone, all surfaced and merged into a single expression. She felt a profound connection to the piano, as though it had been waiting for her all these years to release the music that lived within her. The room seemed to breathe with her, the energy ebbing and flowing with the rise and fall of the notes. A young woman at a nearby table leaned over to her companion, whispering, her eyes wide with admiration. An older couple held hands across the table, listening intently, the expressions on their faces softened by the music. Even those who had been skeptical or disinterested moments before now found themselves drawn in, unable to look away, unable to dismiss the sound that filled the space with authenticity and emotion. The piano was no longer just an object. It was a conduit for human experience, a reminder of the power of patience, dedication, and the courage to express oneself. She continued to play, letting the music carry her through unspoken stories, weaving emotion and technique seamlessly. Each note resonated, each chord echoed, and the room was transformed. Patrons who had been focused on their meals were now absorbed in the experience, their attention held not by spectacle, but by the undeniable truth of the performance. It was intimate, personal, and yet universal, speaking to each listener in a way that bypassed social barriers and status. Time became fluid. She lost track of the minutes, absorbed in the dialogue she was having with the piano in the room. The energy of the space was responsive, each note met with silent acknowledgement, each pause noticed and felt. Her hands moved with confidence, her heart guided by instinct and memory, a lifetime of practice manifesting in real time. She felt the room's shift, the subtle change in perception, the quiet respect and awe that had replaced earlier skepticism. When she finally concluded, the room remained silent for a moment longer than expected, the resonance of the final note lingering in the air. Then, slowly, applause began. It was soft at first, tentative, then grew, spreading through the restaurant like a gentle wave of acknowledgement and admiration. Patrons clapped, staff members smiled, and the man with the notebook closed it slowly, offering a nod that spoke volumes. She had once again reminded them that talent and depth often reside in the most unexpected places. that brilliance does not always announce itself, and that true artistry is both sincere and transformative. She rose from the piano, hands resting lightly on the edge, and took a deep breath. The applause washed over her, not as a demand for recognition, but as a confirmation that the music had spoken. She felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, the culmination of effort, practice, and courage manifesting in this shared moment of beauty. Patrons approached with genuine admiration, offering compliments, expressing surprise, and acknowledging the quiet power of her performance. She accepted the words with humility, aware that the music itself had already conveyed what needed to be said. As she returned to her work, moving through the tables and delivering orders, she noticed the subtle changes in the atmosphere. Conversations were enriched with thoughtful pauses, glances carried new depth, and even the staff moved with a sense of shared pride and wonder. The restaurant, once ordinary in its elegance, had become a space touched by art, by the revelation of hidden talent, and by the quiet strength of a human spirit asserting itself through music. Later, as the night drew to a close, she lingered by the piano one last time. Her fingers hovered above the keys, feeling the familiar texture, the gentle resistance, the silent promise of expression. She pressed a single note, letting it resonate in the quiet room, a soft farewell to the evening. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a companion, a teacher, and a witness to her journey. She closed it gently, stepping back with a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her talent had been seen, her music had been heard, and her voice had been honored. She left the restaurant that night with a sense of fulfillment and anticipation. The piano, the room, the patrons, and even the staff had all played a role in an experience that was both personal and shared. She carried the memory of the evening with her, a quiet joy that would sustain her through ordinary days, reminding her that courage, practice, and the willingness to share one's gift could create moments of profound beauty and connection. Each step home was lighter, buoyed by the knowledge that she had once again bridged the gap between expectation and reality, between hidden talent and recognition, between herself and the world around her. The following weeks brought a subtle transformation in the restaurant. She arrived each evening with her usual quiet demeanor, yet there was a spark in her step, a sense of anticipation that had not been there before. Patrons spoke her name in whispers, curiosity mingling with admiration. The staff exchanged knowing glances, some offering gentle smiles of respect, others holding back words, unsure how to approach the woman whose music had captivated so many. She continued her work with grace, balancing trays and tending tables. Yet the piano called to her every moment it was within reach. One evening, a group of influential patrons entered the restaurant. They were prominent figures, known for their sharp judgment and exacting standards. Their presence created a buzz in the room, a mixture of excitement and anxiety. She moved through the tables, taking orders with care, her mind occasionally drifting to the piano in the corner. Her hands itched to play, but she hesitated. She wondered if she could rise to the occasion, if her music would meet the expectations of those who might judge so critically. The guests lingered, sipping drinks and chatting, unaware of the anticipation building quietly around them. Some staff members nudged each other subtly, glances passing back and forth as they noted the heightened tension. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that the piano did not ask for approval, that her music was a reflection of her own dedication and passion. She approached it slowly, fingers grazing the keys in a gentle touch. Feeling the familiar warmth and resistance, she pressed a single note, letting it resonate across the room, soft yet commanding attention. The melody began quietly, almost conversational, weaving through the air with a delicate precision. Patrons who had been engaged in conversation paused, their ears drawn to the sound. The influential guests straightened in their seats, their expressions shifting as they realized that something extraordinary was occurring. She played with careful intention, allowing each note to communicate emotion, experience, and authenticity. The room transformed around her, attention focusing not on status or expectation, but on the music itself. Her hands moved with a fluid grace, the result of years spent practicing in secret, honing her skill with patience and dedication. Each chord carried meaning, each transition reflected the depth of her understanding and feeling. Memories of long nights filled with practice and determination surfaced, blending into the present, lending strength and clarity to her performance. The patrons were drawn into the moment, captivated by the authenticity of her expression, unable to look away or dismiss the beauty unfolding before them. The influential guests exchanged glances, their skepticism replaced by a quiet awe. The music spoke a language they had not expected, reaching beyond social boundaries and preconceptions. They listened intently, recognizing the depth of talent and emotion conveyed through each note. The room became a shared space, connected by sound, emotion, and presence. Even the staff paused in their duties, watching in admiration and quiet wonder, witnessing something rare and remarkable. She allowed the melody to rise and fall naturally, each phrase unfolding with precision and care. The notes spoke of struggles overcome, quiet resilience, and the triumph of persistence. Patrons felt the weight of the music, the subtleties and nuances, the delicate balance between technical skill and heartfelt expression. Each person experienced the performance uniquely, yet all were united in the recognition that they were witnessing something special, something beyond ordinary expectation. A young woman at a nearby table whispered to her companion, her eyes shining with emotion. An elderly man nodded slowly, a faint smile breaking through his usual reserve. Even those who had initially questioned her presence at the piano now sat transfixed, understanding that the music was not just sound, but a manifestation of a deeply human story. She felt a connection to the room, to each listener, and to herself, a bond created through the shared experience of art and expression. The melody shifted to a softer, more introspective tone. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing the music to guide her, carrying her through memories, hopes, and dreams that had been cultivated over a lifetime. The piano responded to her touch with a nuanced voice, a conversation of sound and emotion that transcended ordinary interaction. The room seemed to pause, caught in the delicate tension between anticipation and fulfillment, each listener immersed in the story being told without words. Time became irrelevant. She played on, guided by instinct, memory, and passion. The notes flowed effortlessly, each movement of her hands deliberate yet natural. The audience felt the intensity of her commitment, the authenticity of her expression, and the quiet power of a woman revealing her soul through music. Every chord resonated deeply, every phrase carried significance, and the room collectively held its breath, recognizing the extraordinary talent in front of them. As the final notes lingered, a hush settled over the restaurant. Patrons absorbed the resonance of the last chord, the weight of the experience hanging in the air. Then, gradually, applause began. It started softly, hesitant at first, then grew, spreading through the room with genuine admiration and respect. Staff members joined in, faces alight with pride and wonder. The influential guests nodded, some leaning forward to offer quiet compliments, their expressions softened by the beauty they had witnessed. She rose from the piano, her hands resting lightly on the edge, feeling the energy of the room and the affirmation of her efforts. The applause was not for recognition alone, but for the courage, dedication, and authenticity that had brought the music to life. Patrons approached, offering heartfelt compliments, sharing their amazement, and expressing gratitude for the experience. She accepted their words with humility, aware that the music itself had communicated what needed to be said. Later, as she returned to her routine, she felt the subtle transformation in the restaurant. Conversations carried a new warmth, glances held understanding, and the atmosphere was imbued with a shared sense of respect and appreciation. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a symbol of connection, courage, and the ability to transcend social boundaries through art. Each note she had played had left an impression, a quiet reminder that talent and expression often reside where least expected. As the night drew to a close, she lingered by the piano, fingers resting lightly on the keys. A single note resonated in the quiet room, a soft farewell to the evening and a promise of future melodies. She felt a sense of fulfillment and anticipation, knowing that the piano and her music would continue to be a source of strength and expression. Walking toward the exit, she carried the memory of the evening with her, a quiet joy that would sustain her through ordinary days and remind her of the power of courage, practice, and the willingness to share one's gift with the world. She knew that her music had not only reached others, but had also transformed her, giving her a renewed sense of purpose and an unshakable belief in the value of her voice and her talent.